Alright, so now this video is going to talk about Native Americans and farmers. Both Native Americans and farmers are important because they've both been the subject of a lot of the essays on the AP US History exam, and they both have a lot of multiple choice questions related to them. Alright, so Manifest Destiny, the Gold Rush, and homesteads contributed to the spread of American westward movement. And as people came westward, they basically began to infringe on the territories of Native Americans who resided on westward land. Remember, the Native Americans were actually forced to move west by Andrew Jackson's Removal Act. So basically, to deal with this problem of Americans settling on Native American land in the West, the U.S. Department of Interior espoused a form of Native American independence while placing them on reservations. And reservations were basically pockets of land. It was out west that was strictly for Native American use. Helen Hunt Jackson actually wrote A Century of Dishonor, which shined an unforgiving light on the reservation system, and it exposed many of the shortcomings of the reservation system. Helen Hunt Jackson's book actually helped create the Dawes Act of 1887, which was supposed to correct the inadequacies of the reservation system by offering land and citizenship to the heads of Indian families in an attempt to basically make them more American. However, the act resulted in the Native American losing millions of additional acres of land so that more land could be opened up for the American settlers. So the Burke Act of 1906 tried to correct the problems of the Dawes Act, but it too was ineffective as well. And basically both the Dawes Act and the Burke Act were just useless. In the late 1800s, farmers felt like they were working too hard and not getting enough profit for it, causing them to constantly be in debt. They basically thought they were providing a really important resource to people and were underappreciated and underpaid. So to represent the farmers' grievances, the Grange was formed, and the Grange was an organization of farmers who gained political power in the West. Since farmers were always in debt, Grangers supported the production of more money, and creating more money, of course, causes inflation, which decreases the value of debt. Traditionally, money is formed by a gold standard, meaning basically a dollar is only created when the treasury can back it up with a gold coin. However, Grangers didn't want to support the gold standard. Grangers formed the Greenback Party, whose main goal was to print greenbacks or paper dollars that weren't backed by gold. More moderate farmers supported the silver standard, where they thought money should be backed by silver coins instead of gold coins. The Populist Party, also known as the People's Party, gained momentum in the 1870s and 1880s. The Populist Party basically supported a silver standard of 16:1, meaning 16 ounces of silver to 1 ounce of gold. The Populist Party also advocated policies that would favor the wage laborers in the North and South. Basically, the Populist Party looked out for the common man on the street, both in the North and the South. The election of 1896 was pretty important because the Populist Party's candidate, William Jennings Bryan, got into the main election. William Jennings Bryan represented the Democratic and Populist Party, while William McKinley represented the Republican Party. McKinley won the election. And that pretty much sums it up for the Native Americans and farmers. I just touched on some of the important points you might want to remember for the exam. Next, we're going to go on and move to the Industrial Revolution in America. Basically, in America, the Industrial Revolution occurred because of improved technologies like the railroad, a bountiful of natural resources, and a larger than normal labor supply. Because remember, former slaves and former soldiers, women and children were now working in the factories. A monopoly or a trust is basically when a big business leader would set the prices for everyone else, thus eliminating competition. Industrialization was made possible because of a laissez-faire policy and the belief in social Darwinism. Laissez-faire was basically the idea that government should have absolutely no place in the economy. The government can in no way regulate business. Basically, laissez-faire means like just basically the government is not involved in the economy no matter how bad it gets or how good it gets. So they don't regulate business at all. Social Darwinism was basically a theory based off of Charles Darwin's biological theory of evolution. Social Darwinism basically promotes a survival of the fittest ideology, where the strong rule and the weak die out. The period of industrial revolution is actually called the Gilded Age, because there was a lot of corruption during this time. Congress's vote could be bought by rich businessmen. There was a lot of corruption, and robber barons, which are basically rich business owners, they took advantage of the lower class and cheated in business deals. Everything looked good on the outside during the Gilded Age, but it was all a product of corruption and greed. Rockefeller was the robber baron for oil. Vanderbilt and Stanford were the robber barons for railroads, and J.P. Morgan was a robber baron for banks. Andrew Carnegie was a big businessman too, but he wasn't a robber baron. He actually wrote something called the Gospel of Wealth, where he basically encouraged his fellow businessmen to donate their large profits to charities. And he basically, he was a response, like, he wanted to take a stance against the greed and corruption of the Gilded Age. One of the biggest forms of corruption took place on the railroad tracks. Railroad track owners would basically gouge prices often, and because they realized railroads were the only mode of transportation that transported goods quickly and efficiently, because obviously cars and planes weren't invented yet. So they took advantage of that, and they gouged the prices often. And in the 1880s, voters were tired of laissez-faire policies. They basically requested for the government's help in regulating big monopolies. And since railroads had huge corruption, they were the first to be regulated by the government. The government set the maximum rate laws, which established the highest price a railroad company could charge, but these weren't well enforced. Then the government passed the Interstate Commerce Act of 1887, basically forbidding railroads from forming monopolistic price agreements. This too was pretty hard to enforce, but was enforced much more strictly than the maximum rate laws were. The most important antitrust legislation is the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890. It basically forbade all businesses to restrain trade by trust or conspiracy. However, most of the presidents weren't willing to oppose business interests, so this too was not enforced as well as it could have been. Since the Industrial Revolution had such a large supply of labor, it's only natural for labor unions to form. So unions fought for higher wages and better working conditions for the workers. Labor unions, to remember, are the Knights of Labor, American Federation of Labor, Industrial Workers of the World, and the AFL, or the American Federation of Labor, was notably led by Samuel Gompers, a nickname for the industrial workers of the world was the Wobblies. Also, the Haymarket Square Riot of 1886 in Chicago was a protest by a union that escalated to violence. Basically, the protest occurred because union members were just annoyed with how the police treated them during strikes and past protests. So one of the union members threw a bomb that killed a lot of police officers, which provoked the police officers to attack the crowd. And the police basically killed more protesters that day, and that's the very reason why the protest was taking place, because the protesters were unhappy with the police treatment. So that's kind of ironic. The Haymarket Square Riot shined a really negative light on labor unions, and it led to a decline in membership.